Okay. So, yes. So, suggesting activity ideas that are meaningful, optional, and encourage curiosity. So, in terms of being meaningful, it's important to, as I mentioned before, to provide that context and remember that if it's not meaningful, if you're sending home like a list of words or something that's not related to any topic or anything, then it's not actually going to, the children probably won't remember it. And that it's also important to make them adaptable. As I mentioned before, children learn at different paces and in different ways. And so if you're expecting them all to achieve the same thing at the same time, then that's probably not going to happen. So it's important for that to be adaptable. And encouraging curiosity is really important as well. So that if you go back to your objectives at the beginning, it's important to remember that if you don't have that engagement and that if the children aren't going to be motivated to continue, then you're kind of not meeting your objectives. So encouraging curiosity is really important. Okay, so let's really value relationships. Something really important is we can use English to stay connected. Okay, so that's very simple, but it's kind of that is what learning another language is about. It's about communication and connections, and so we can actually use English as a way to stay connected and for well-being as well. So just to give you a couple of personal experiences, last Saturday I had my online class with my students in year 5, and normally we have a face-to-face class, but we've all changed to the digital format. What was really nice about that at the end and brought home how important it is to maintain those connections and relationships. My favourite part, when I asked them what was your favourite part of the lesson, and they all said we enjoyed seeing our friends again. And I thought that was really just sort of underpinned everything. In terms of, for them, it was really important for them to stay connected and see each other, and they don't normally see each other. I don't think they go to the same school, so it was really nice for them to be able to meet up again and say hello and see that they were all okay. So having learned that from them, I'm actually, next week I've decided to let them have a little chat in English at the start of the lesson, just to ask each other how they are. So it's really important, and I think we shouldn't underestimate how much children might miss each other, miss their friends, and just to sort of bear that in mind. And if there's a way that we can stay connected, then I'd encourage you to do that. My own children, as a parent, and this is something that's sort of working really well, is they're enjoying doing their homework together. So if they're lucky enough to have siblings, they can do some of the schoolwork together, and they're 2 years apart, but it's nice to see that learning going on between siblings. They can teach each other things, they can help each other, and also if there's problems that as a parent I can't actually help them with. So for example, if you're worried about sending home activities that are in English and the parents might not speak English, then that's okay. If there's a way that those children can connect with each other to do that work, then that's really good. It could, they don't need devices. They could do that over the telephone if that's possible. So we don't, it's just about encouraging those connections, and we can still sort of manage that group work and that pair work even though they're not in the same classroom. I think short videos are a quick and efficient way of checking in as well. If you haven't got a chance to go live, you could always just make a quick video, which might feel more personal than an email, just saying, hi, how are you? I hope you're managing okay with the work that I've sent you, and it doesn't have to be every day. It could just be once a week. And if you can't do a video, you could still sort of write to the parents via email. But it's important, I think, to just keep those connections alive. And yesterday, in yesterday's webinar, we actually had somebody in the chat, Raquel, who said that her students were really excited to see their friends in a live session after a week, and that was something motivating for her. So again, I'm not the only one who has experienced that, and I think that, you know, it's just valuing those connections, and again, it's very easy to do that in English, and it's very light. It's one of the first things they learn to say, isn't it? Hello, how are you? So we're revising our vocabulary and our expressions. Okay, so I'd like to look now at, we've spoken about how important it is to be motivated, and how important it is to keep that thread and that engagement. So how do we keep students motivated? How do we keep children motivated? And I think these things are really, really important. So how do we keep them motivated? We motivate them by giving them choice. Okay. It's really important that children have a sense of agency in this. And I think what we're trying to do, something that we can do at home, which we may not be doing, may not be able to do as much at school, but because they're at home and they have got all this time and it doesn't have much structure, is to encourage autonomy. Something that's been working for me is giving my own children, they can read off the list of things that have been sent home, and they can actually choose what they want to do. And that has been so much more motivating for them than me saying, right, you have to do this, and now you have to do this, and next you have to do that. And, you know, instead of, oh mom, I finished this, now I'm going to do this. So it's just a very small change. It's nothing, I haven't asked the teachers to do anything different. It's just that I'm letting my children make a choice, and that's working really well. I think as teachers, if you let the children choose the things that they're most motivated by, you could actually be really surprised. And sometimes it's the sensation that they've had a say in it that gives them that motivation. So they'll end up doing what you wanted them to do, but it's like you've given them the option, and that's how you got them in there in the first place. So I think it's important to just keep that in mind. Challenges. It's really important that children, I mean, they love a challenge. And we had a participant yesterday who was talking about, he does a daily challenge with his students, and we'll talk about that later in the session where we bring up those ideas. But we've got the challenges that you know, children love challenges. So we could set a small daily challenge or a bigger weekly challenge, and that could take the form of a project. And I think if we give them inspiring ideas and then a few things, some guidance on how to do that, rather than exactly our idea of how it's going to end up, I think that can be really motivating. So in that sense, there could be more than one right answer, and that doesn't matter. It's okay. You know, that sort of challenge, that type of challenge that might have more than one right answer, or we don't know what it's going to look like until the students actually submit it. That sort of thing develops critical thinking skills and questioning techniques. And it's really important that we give students that opportunity. And the projects can also be cross-curricular. So if they're in English, that's already cross-curricular, and then it could be English and science, or science and music, or PE and science. And so you can actually be doing lots and lots of different things, but within the one project. So that, and then that project, going back to what we were saying before, that provides motivation. So that is why we're sort of looking at these types of things. The challenge will provide the motivation. Okay. And then we've got collaboration. So collaboration, I think, is really important if it's possible. I mean, we've got to work within our restraints and understand that maybe all of these things won't be possible. But what I was mentioning before about working together is really motivating and really activates the learning. So if you have opportunities to suggest things like that, then I think that would be a great idea. And they also, I think what I've found with my own children is they really enjoy working together to solve problems, and they quite like the fact that their mum can't help them. They're really they're really excited that, you know, they have to go and ask a friend because their mum doesn't know the answer. So it's again, that's promoting autonomy and them being able to problem solve themselves. So how can I do this if I don't know the answer? Well, I can find out from a friend, or we can think of solutions together. So it's a really good way to encourage problem solving if they're working together. And then finally, context, which makes the learning meaningful, which I mentioned before. For example, I think it's really important that we use the current situation as a context. So, for example, lockdown, viruses and confinement, they are a context, and I don't think we should avoid the elephant in the room. And as Mark said to me before, it gives the children a chance to own the situation by talking about it. So I think you'll see from some of our ideas how we've sort of turned that context into an opportunity. So here we have some adaptable project ideas, and we'll go through some of the thinking behind that. So first of all, we have things like children could observe and record plants growing or weather patterns, and that would be obviously a science type activity. They could invent and record a song using simple household objects, and that's sort of related to music. And we have investigating animals that hibernate and that could be a science type of project. I think all of these things show us. So, for example, investigating animals that hibernate, that could be connected to us not being able to leave the house. And that sort of, they might get curious about, well, what happens what happens when we can't leave the house? Why do animals hibernate? What is the function of that? So it's sort of relating it a bit back to what they're going through at the moment and finding out maybe what the cause and what's the effect of hibernation on animals. And that might, you know, again, you can adapt these projects to simple things for younger learners, and then for older learners, it could be something more complicated. So it could be something like, you know, if you're investigating animals that hibernate, for the younger children, it could be sort of drawing and describing where they go to hibernate, finding out where they go to hibernate, and then drawing and describing it. But for older learners, it could be more open-ended. They could look at the different types of animals that hibernate, where they go, the reasons that they hibernate, what that does to their bodies. And so you're linking that to biology, to you know, the circulatory system even. So there's all sorts of links that you can find, but just through an open-ended project like that, and that's interesting and motivating, then they get all the sort of the curriculum goes into that project, rather than looking at ways to teach the curriculum in separate ways. Inventing and recording a simple song using household objects, again, that's making the most of the home, which we might not, at school we might not be able to do that because, you know, we don't have household objects in the music cupboard. So it's looking at ways to turn the situation into an opportunity rather than something to frustrate the students. Again, observing and recording plants growing or weather patterns. We were talking about this before, you know, in class, you're not going to sit there and watch a plant grow and that's the only activity you're doing. However, if children are at home and they've got a much sort of looser kind of timetable, or they haven't got much to do, looking at, you know, observing seeds growing could actually turn into a little project that could be really motivating in terms of well-being as well, at getting them interested in something, or looking at weather patterns and looking, you know, and observing and recording. And so all of those activities are kind of getting the children to use their own context, and using that opportunity of having more time to do things as well. Right, so some more project ideas. We've got so a boredom doodling competition. I mean, you know, some of the things that that children do on the covers of their books and on pieces of paper when they're supposed to be listening to the teacher and doing something else, that could actually be turned into some sort of competition, and what that sort of opportunity again of isolation could be turned into. I mean, it doesn't have to be doodling, it could be, you know, lots of other things, but having some sort of art competition wouldn't be a bad idea. And again, that's an example of an open-ended type of activity where you don't know what the results are going to be. And in my experience, these types of open-ended projects, they're scary for the teacher because you're letting go of control. However, the results are usually so surprising, and I'm always really like shocked, but I'm really, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. If I had told them what to do, my idea probably wouldn't have been as good as theirs. And so I think it's important to think of ways that we can encourage that imagination and creativity as well whilst they're in this situation of lockdown. For science and PE, we could investigate why our bodies need exercise. So that could be an investigation. And I think, again, with these types of projects, we'll look at some things later, but it's important to sort of to scaffold these investigations. So we would, you know, try and provide children with some websites and things that they could go and explore, so that we're sort of giving them some guidance about where to look. But then when they find that information, that's up to them how they present it. You could give them some, for younger learners or for students with a lower level of English, you could give them some sentence prompts to help them out, and that they look at those, they use those sentence prompts so that they can finish the investigation, and that can give them some guidance. I think as well on that point, children's level of English will vary. And it's possible that maybe letting them do some of the research in Spanish is okay, and then they could explain it. The explanations can be done in simpler English later. I think something else that's really interesting, it could be really interesting, is making a photo diary. And so apart from English, and again, this could be done, you know, with younger learners, that just the text is less, they just have to write a sentence, whereas with older learners they could write a paragraph, but just some sort of diary of what they're experiencing in these strange times, and then that actually in the future could become a historical document, and that makes the learning really meaningful for the students. So so those are some ideas for encouraging adaptable project ideas. And I think this is an opportunity to get students, it is a unique time, and it is an opportunity to get students to do things that make a meaningful use of their time. So all these project ideas are trying to get them to make a meaningful use of their time. And then I think as well, if you're suggesting websites, what I was saying before about if you've got suggestions, I think all websites with photos and visuals can help with comprehension. So if they're looking up, you know, why our bodies need exercise and things like that, it's useful to have websites with graphics and things like that they can understand, that aren't too text heavy, and that they're perhaps more suitable for younger learners. So again, that really helps when you're sending them off to do an investigation, to just help them point them in the right direction. I think as well, going back to the point about encouraging autonomous learning, what we're trying to do here with these projects is to encourage that autonomy and encourage that engagement, and not worry so much about the right answer. And I think if we're too focused on perfection, that could actually mean that the children disengage. So, I'm not going to get the right answer, so why bother? And I think as well, we should be encouraging parents to be collaborators rather than doing the work for the children. And I know that this does happen in my own experience. You know, a lot of my friends doing the work for their children. So it does happen. And if the work that's sent home is too difficult, well, it might not actually be the children who are doing it. However, if we're encouraging parents to be collaborators and telling the children it's okay to make mistakes and the project doesn't have to be perfect, then we've got a chance that the children will actually engage with that. So here's some more things. Got some more things before we get out onto the make an indoor routine video. Okay, so something really simple, but you could get the children to make a video of them, you know, what they do in the morning when they get up, get dressed, brush your teeth, you know, before they go to bed, you know, laying out their pajamas on bed, and this is what I'm going to do. So, I mean, just something simple where they show you the items in their house and talk about a routine or daily routine or something that could be really useful. That could also be part of their diary too, couldn't it? So there's you've got that for social science, and then making a video on how to wash your hands properly. The children don't need to share those videos with anybody, but it's just, you know, that could be something that they could do when they get back to school. But it's just the fact of engaging in that. I know that my children love watching YouTube videos all day about other people doing presentations about much less interesting things. So they do like that type of thing. They like seeing themselves on camera. And also, I mean, practicing in front of a camera, even if you're not sharing it with anyone, that's actually really useful for improving your English. So these are all great ideas that could keep them engaged and motivated, and also practicing their English. And I think the final one to say is that you know, basically, one of our constraints is possibly, well, we have to get through the curriculum. There's all this pressure to do this, and this has to be done by then, and things like that. But I think what I would try and do with those ideas that we've sort of put out there, it's more about you just turning what you need to do into challenges and projects. So rather than, you know, perhaps you might not take these ideas to the letter, but sort of using that approach to your teaching and what you're asking the children to do might be helpful. So you know, when we talk about some of the challenges, like turning things into challenges, we'll give you some ideas later before we ask you to do it. But it's about letting go of the control, allowing the children to engage with their passions, which may not be the same as yours, or may not coincide with your expertise. So, for example, in my case, that would be computer games. But I'm not, you know, that where you're letting the children lead the way, that's really motivating and engaging. And I think that's the biggest challenge for teachers sometimes, is to let go of that control and think, well, I don't know what they're going to come up with, but it's sort of my job as facilitator and guide to turn what they've produced into, you know, to point out to them what they have learned by doing it, rather than having a fixed set of objectives in my mind. And that's quite a skill, but it's really rewarding if you can do that. And I think, and in terms of the students, it's super motivating, because they can see that you really are paying attention, or letting them lead the way, you're really putting your trust in them, and they do respond, you know. So I think here's some ideas as well for the virtual classroom. Many of us, you know, as Mark mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, many of us have found ourselves suddenly having to give classes online, and that is a learning curve for many of us. Not all of us have had the same training. Some colleagues are perhaps feeling more comfortable with this type of thing, and other colleagues might be more reluctant because they don't feel that they know how to use the technology very well. I think it's really important to be respectful of everybody. They're doing their best, and the learning curve for some people is a lot steeper. But with the same amount of practice and enthusiasm, they'll be able to sort of catch up their skills. But I think it's important to sort of look at what are some practical ideas for the virtual classroom, and they're simple, so you don't need to be a technological genius. It's just literally, you know, connecting with your students and going back to what we spoke about at the beginning of the webinar, that connection, saying hello, that connection and well-being. And literally connecting and saying hello is just a shout out to say, look, I'm here, I'm still here, everything's okay. And I hope that you are too. So something that you could ask your students is just how did you help at home this week? You know, what did you do? So again, using the current situation as a way of connecting with your students. I mean, I think in my particular case as well, you know, one of the topics was, what are you doing next weekend? And I thought, well, that's a little bit rude, isn't it? I can't ask them what they're doing next weekend. They'd love to be out swimming and dancing and running around, and they can't be. So we turned it into a different type of activity. What are you going to do when the lockdown is over? So we're still using the same kind of grammar, I'm going to, but we're just changing the context a bit. So it's that sort of, I guess, giving the whatever activity you're doing the context and as an opportunity to connect. And so by doing that, I was showing students that I was connecting with their reality. And so just connecting and saying hello is really important. Setting a daily or weekly challenge or project. I know that I've seen on YouTube that there are teachers who video record themselves setting a daily challenge or a project, and that's really, it's very simple. It could be just, you know, find out how the platform works or something like that. It doesn't have to be you know, a big thing. It's just a small thing that they need to do before they check in with you next. Okay, you could use the virtual classroom to answer any questions that they may have. And also something that's really important is to encourage children by praising their efforts. So if you've been seeing that the children have been doing their online activities or emailing you their work, or they've done a project that you've set them, is just encourage those students, and that might encourage the others to do it as well if they're not. I think we've got to be really careful. Don't shame students who haven't done anything, because as we mentioned before, people's circumstances are so different. But I think that encouraging the children and praising efforts will really show our students that we're taking notice as well. So it's not just ignoring, oh, you've done all this work, well, that's great, I'll just send you tomorrow's list of work. So I think it's important to acknowledge their efforts in getting things done as well. And it's the small things make such a difference. So yeah, I think that's sort of looking at ways that you can use your virtual classroom. And you might be able to share with us in the chat as well some things that you've done if you've moved some of your classes online. What are you doing in that virtual class time? I mean, not everyone will have that opportunity, but for those of you who do, then it's useful for us to share. And then I think this was something, what I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar. It was so lovely to have contributions from people yesterday who had joined us, and we got so much out of it, and that dialogue was super useful. And we really appreciate everybody taking their time to come along and share ideas. So there's this sense of community, that we're all in this together, and that it's going to be okay. And I really loved this comment from Julie in the chat. She said that we're in a hyperproductive, hyperactive society, and really human contact is what's important at the moment, not 5,000 activities to fill the confinement time. And I couldn't agree with you more, Julie. I think that's a brilliant you know, take on things. And I think that's what we're trying to do here, is look at sometimes, you know, just a simple project idea that is open-ended. It gets the children engaged. You're able to talk about it in English when you do connect with them next time. That is doing far more than sort of a list of contents and a list of words and a list of, you know, things that we have to get through. And I think that we're achieving our objectives of continuity and engagement and enthusiasm by doing those types of things. So thanks, Julie, for that excellent comment that we were able to share today. So here are some further links and resources. You know, if you're looking for a place to start, it's not exhaustive, but there's some useful things here. We've got some Learn English Kids, the Learn English Kids from the British Council website, which has got fantastic resources there. There's poems, songs, stories, games. Children can make up their own story. There's tons of things to do there. National Geographic Kids for social sciences and so for natural science. That's really useful, child friendly, lots of graphics, lots of photographs, lots of ideas but challenges as well. And then science experiments, that's another thing that's brilliant to sort of there kind of, you could send home science experiments for children to look at, and they could do them, and so they're following the instructions in English, and then they're explaining what they did the next time you see them. So and then also there's some things for managing the needs of children with special needs, and the first video actually is really interesting because it really just talks about how important that social contact is for children with special needs. And I think that, you know, it fits in really nicely with what we've been saying. It's the simple things that matter. So I think that's really important. And then so if you like, you could take photos of this page if that's useful for you. And then also if you've got other ideas for other subjects as well in the chat. So
and just to add there, yes. That we will also be putting the PowerPoint up, and we'll add the links that are coming up in the chat, of which there are many.
Yes, that's right. So that's what we did yesterday, didn't we? And we'll do it again today. So, and just mention that those last two, the autism games and the do to learn activities, they're brilliant, and they were. It was Alberto from yesterday's webinar. He gave us those fantastic teachers and parents of children with special needs. So thank you so much. And that's an example of how this collaboration is just brilliant. And
Alberto's here again today as well.
Oh, great. Thank you, Alberto. You're here.
Can I interrupt you there? Just because I know we're a bit short of time, and some people can stay on a bit longer. But of the various things that are coming through, there are lots of activities. There's lots of great suggestions from different teachers. There are lots of things. But one of the questions I think that maybe we should deal with, gone through it several times, is the question around evaluation. And I think, I could tell you what I think I might admit, but for me, I think the key thing here is...
Tell me, Mark, I want to know what you think, because I'm sure I think the same. Yeah,
my feeling is that there, the key question is why are you evaluating? Not so much what is another matter, but why are you evaluating? If you have to evaluate because that's what you do in the classroom, then I think you need to look at that very carefully about whether that is appropriate at this moment and what sort of evaluation might be. If it's because you're told by your regional government that you need to evaluate, then I think it's fair to ask the regional government how they expect you to do that and what the tools are that are appropriate. Because if that is a directive from above, then I think it needs to be accompanied by the right tools and the right procedures and everything. If it's because you think that you need to evaluate because I need to test their listening, I need to test their speaking, my question is why? Why do you need to test that? I'm not saying you don't, but I'm saying if you can't answer the why. If it's just because that's what we do, because that's how we do it, then I think at the moment, that's not enough. I think at the moment, you need to ask yourself, why do I need to do it now? What is it? And can I take the information I need if I need to keep some sort of regular update from what they are doing for me, what they are doing with me? Because I would seriously question whether evaluating young children in this particular moment, when you do not know what their home environment is, you don't know what they're dealing with, you don't know what their parents are doing, you don't know what's going on, I would question the appropriacy of just saying, that's what I do. I don't know what you think. Sorry.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Mark. I totally agree. And I think it's like, what will you be evaluating? And I would bring it back to what are our objectives? And that's why I was flicking through the slide. We've come back to what are our objectives? What are your objectives as a teacher? And if they are these, to provide some sort of continuity to encourage children to keep learning and to support parents, and you have achieved your objectives. So, is it, like you said, is it realistic to be evaluating the children on things that they would normally do in a classroom, which they aren't in a classroom? So the conditions have completely changed. And I would say, why are we keeping in contact with our students? We're trying to provide some sort of continuity. We're trying to provide, particularly, I suppose, for English language, so that they don't forget things and that they remember, and we want to keep them engaged in their learning. And I think you'll know if they're engaged by whether you're sort of getting some feedback from them. And I think, you can look at the children who are doing things and think about also with evaluation. I really like the early years approach to evaluation. It's building on what children can do. So evaluate what they have done and look at the things that they've done in the sense of have they sent some of their work in? Are they more or less keeping up with some of the things that we've been doing? But yes, it's definitely not business as usual.
And I think there are people saying that you have to do it. Just respond 1 second. There are people that
yeah, exactly. And start a conversation. Yeah, sorry, Anne.
No, I was just going to say, through the chat, there's a strong feeling, people are writing it, it's because we're being told to do it. So, maybe the messages have some confidence to say, well, what with or how. And there are also in the chat some ideas of people who are actually evaluating in real time their students, or asking them to do fun things like record a bit of speaking and use that to evaluate it. So, so I think reading the chat, we'll all find some ideas. Being told.
There are questions too that are coming up about equity, which I think is very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Not everybody has the same connections.
Exactly. And so
the ability to connect, and some kids have an iPad, some kids might have laptops, some kids might have nothing. So how are you reaching them? And you mentioned that a little bit, Tracey, didn't you? Earlier?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, and I think again, it comes down to providing that equity. It's not always possible, so the assessment can't be the same. If that's what you're being. One thing as well, I would like to point out is that in terms of assessment, you're the teacher. You set the objectives and you evaluate those as well. I think you need to have freedom to be able to set your objectives and evaluate whether they're doing what you're asking, and feel confident that that is enough. That like we said, business as usual is not the option. So and for me, evaluating is always closely connected to what I'm doing. So if I've set a project and I actually set the objectives, nobody sets the objectives for me. And I think in primary, we should have a bit of that freedom as well, to sort of, as educators, we set the objectives and we evaluate, but I do think that, definitely, if I go back to that point about not shaming students who haven't done anything as well, that's really important. And how can you fairly evaluate students who have such differing circumstances, not just the technological issues, but with parents who can't supervise the work that's being done because they're busy driving an ambulance or something like that. So it's a very important conversation to have too. Yeah, definitely. So I don't. Have we got time to throw out there?
No, I don't think we have time to do that. Although people have been adding them in the chat. Maybe we could just, because can we just go to that last slide so we can tell people where they can find out more information? Maureen, because you did it yesterday, could you just share with everybody where you put yesterday's recording and what we'll do with today's?
These are just various of the ways that the British Council, you can stay in touch with the British Council here in Spain. So through our Twitter account, through our Facebook account. We've also got a newsletter for teachers, which you can sign up for on our britishcouncil.es website. There's a section there which is bulletins. Just choose the bulletin you want to subscribe to and you'll start getting those updates. What we've also done is start a new page, which is this one. You can't really see it. It's called, it's on our homepage, and it's all about bringing together all of the initiatives that the British Council in Spain is doing while we're all staying at home. So there are resources there for families to help support their children's learning English over this period. There are resources for teachers, and then there's also pulling together the cultural offer that we have. Now, the webinar from yesterday, the webinar recording from today and tomorrow, will be added to this site in the teachers section. Okay, our webmaster is the person in charge of doing that. So what we do is we provide them with all the materials, and we'll also make the presentation, contributions, some of the great ideas that come through for projects, activities, and supporting your students remotely. Okay.
Thanks. And we're also looking at the possibility of, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do this because we need to look to our communications team, of using some of the presentations in the today and yesterday to start some threads on Facebook. So there might be opportunity to discuss some of these things further with each other, with us, if we can get these threads through our Facebook link, our Facebook feed. So we might try and do that as well. We're looking at the possibility of doing that so we can continue the conversations. I think that's it. I mean, we can stay on. If you want to be scrolling through the chat for anything, we'll leave it on for a little bit in case you've missed something. But I just want to say a big thank you to Tracey for that session and for another very, very, very interesting and useful hour. And a very, very big thank you to all of you for joining in, for contributing with your comments, with your suggestions, with your questions. It's been really, really interesting, as always, for us to hear what you're saying. We understand that this is a very, very difficult time for a lot of teachers. There are lots of restrictions on not just mobility, but actually what you can do in terms of working with your kids in the classroom. And one of the reasons for us to do these, to put together these sessions, these webinars, is to focus on the idea of making it as reasonable, if you like, as possible. This idea of less is more. We're not going to produce a classroom in children's homes. It's not going to happen. There's no point trying to do something useful with the kids, to keep them occupied, to keep this continuity going, to help them learn, to show them we're there. And less is more is a really, really good little motto to take away, I think. And I think that's it. So all I want to say is thanks very much for joining. Stay safe, everyone. If you're a secondary teacher as well, we'll hope to see you. We'll be doing more looking at secondary, and otherwise keep in touch with us, and hopefully we'll have some other things available for you after Savannah Sunday. So keep well, stay safe, and bye to everyone. And thanks again, Tracey.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.